Buried deep in the heart of Colorado, a place exists where the most dangerous men in America are entombed in silence. A world of steel doors, endless surveillance, and cells so isolated that inmates rarely see another human face. This is ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison. Here, men who once commanded armies on the streets, masterminded cartel empires, or led violent prison gangs are reduced to shadows in solitary confinement. Among them is Tyler Davis Bingham, known to fellow inmates as the Hulk. For decades, Bingham's name has been whispered with fear in prison yards and cell blocks across the country. Once a petty thief, he rose through the brutal ranks of the Aryan Brotherhood, the most feared white supremacist prison gang in America, until he stood at the very top of its hierarchy. From behind bars, he directed a reign of terror, ordering murders, assaults, and drug trafficking operations that reached across the federal prison system. How does a man go from small-time criminal to one of the most notorious leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood? This is the story of the Hulk, a story of violence, power, and the iron grip of prison gangs. To understand Bingham's rise, we first need to understand the environment that shaped him. Tyler Davis. Bingham was not born into power. He was not a criminal mastermind, nor a man of wealth. His beginnings were far more ordinary and far more troubled. In his youth, Bingham turned to petty crime. Theft, small hustles, and brushes with the law defined his early years. He wasn't unique in this. Thousands of men in America walked the same path during the 1960s and 1970s, a period when prisons were swelling with new inmates. But inside the prison walls, something far more dangerous was taking root. The American prison system was fractured along racial lines. Black inmates were organizing into powerful groups like the Black Guerrilla Family. Hispanic inmates rallied under banners like the Mexican Mafia and Nuestra Familia. And white inmates, they looked for their own brotherhood in a world where survival often depended on alliances. It was in California's San Quentin prison in 1964 that the Aryan Brotherhood was born. Initially, it was a gang created for protection, a tight-knit circle of white inmates banding together against rivals. But survival soon gave way to something else: profit, drugs, gambling, extortion. The Aryan Brotherhood evolved into a violent, organized crime syndicate within prison walls. This was the world Bingham entered when he first aligned himself with the Aryan Brotherhood. His petty thefts may have landed him behind bars, but inside, theft and hustling meant little. In prison, respect came from one thing: violence. And violence was a language Bingham understood. To survive, and to prove his worth, Bingham embraced the Brotherhood's code. Loyalty was absolute. Orders were followed without question. Betrayal meant death. But Bingham wasn't just another foot soldier. Those who watched him in these early years noted his discipline, his commitment, and his willingness to do whatever the gang demanded. In a world where many cracked under pressure, Bingham remained cold and steady. This quality would carry him upward in the ranks of a gang where most men never saw beyond the prison yard. By the 1980s, the Aryan Brotherhood was no longer just a prison gang. It had become a shadow empire, feared across the federal system. And Tyler the Hulk Bingham was about to rise from the role of enforcer to that of commander. What followed was a career of blood and control that would make Bingham one of the most feared men in America's prison system. His story was only beginning. By the 1980s, the Aryan Brotherhood was no longer just a gang of white inmates huddled together for protection. It had become an empire of violence, running rackets inside prisons across America. drugs, gambling, extortion, all controlled by a brotherhood that lived by one simple rule: blood in, blood out. For Tyler, the Hulk Bingham, this was the world in which his star began to rise. He had proven himself willing to kill, willing to enforce the Brotherhood's brutal code. In prison culture, where survival depended on fear and respect, Bingham's name carried weight. He wasn't loud and he wasn't flashy, but those who crossed him didn't live long enough to forget their mistake. The Aryan Brotherhood was run like a military machine. Orders flowed down from a handful of leaders, men known as commissioners, who controlled the gang's activities across the federal system. And in the 1980s, Bingham was chosen to step into this inner circle. Alongside Barry Mills, another hardened AB veteran, Bingham was elevated to the rank of commissioner. Together, the two men would transform the Aryan Brotherhood from a prison gang into something far more dangerous: a nationwide crime syndicate operating behind bars. From their cells, Bingham and Mills directed everything, from drug smuggling to orchestrated murders. They ruled not with charisma, but with absolute violence. To defy them was to invite certain death. The pair became experts at running an empire from behind bars. Messages were passed through coded notes hidden in legal documents and relayed by loyal soldiers who carried out their orders. Even inside maximum security prisons, their influence stretched across the nation. By the 1990s, Bingham's role as High Commissioner was secure. He and Mills shared near-total control of the Brotherhood's operations in the federal system. Together, they dictated alliances, declared wars against rival gangs, and decided who lived and who died. Their power rested on terror. When a rival gang challenged AB's dominance, Bingham and Mills ordered retaliations: stabbings in the yard, ambushes in cells, executions carried out with handmade shanks. When an AB member betrayed the gang, the punishment was death. Betrayal could mean something as small as refusing to follow orders or questioning leadership. In the Brotherhood, loyalty wasn't requested, it was demanded. The violence wasn't random, it was strategic, calculated to maintain AB's iron grip on the federal prison system. Every murder sent a message. The Aryan Brotherhood controlled life and death behind bars. Federal officials estimated that while the Aryan Brotherhood made up less than 1% of the prison population, it was responsible for as much as 20% of murders inside federal facilities. That staggering number was a testament to the reign of terror men like Bingham unleashed. But Bingham wasn't just about blood. He was also about business. Under his co-leadership, the Brotherhood expanded its role in drug trafficking. Methamphetamine, heroin, and marijuana flowed through prison walls, controlled by AB networks that reached far beyond the cells. On the outside, associates and family members handled distribution. Inside, addicts became customers, paying not in cash, but in violence and loyalty. This combination of violence and profit turned the Aryan Brotherhood into something much larger than the prison gang it had once been. And at the center of it all, directing operations with cold precision, was Tyler Bingham. He had become more than just an enforcer. He was a commander, a strategist, and a feared leader who helped turn the Aryan Brotherhood into the most notorious prison gang in America. But with power came blood. And Bingham's leadership would soon be marked by some of the most brutal killings the federal prison system had ever seen. By the mid-1990s, Tyler the Hulk Bingham wasn't just a name in the prison system. He was a force. Alongside Barry Mills, he directed the Aryan Brotherhood's empire with cold precision. But power inside prison is never secure. Rivals circle constantly. Loyalties shift. And for the Aryan Brotherhood, violence was the only guarantee of survival. In 1997, the Brotherhood sent a brutal message, one that would later haunt Bingham during his trial. Two black inmates, Frank Joyner and Abdul Salam, were targeted by AB orders. The Brotherhood had long thrived on racial conflict, and its leaders maintained dominance through fear and intimidation. Joyner and Salam represented a threat, and in the prison logic of the Brotherhood, that meant elimination. Joyner and Salam were stabbed repeatedly in a calculated ambush. The killings were swift, brutal, and unmistakable in their message. The Aryan Brotherhood tolerated no rivals. For prosecutors, these murders would later become the centerpiece of their case against Bingham. But at the time, they were just another chapter in the Brotherhood's ongoing campaign of blood. The murders of Joyner and Salam were far from isolated incidents. Under Bingham's co-leadership, the Brotherhood declared war on multiple groups inside federal prisons: the Mexican Mafia, the Black Guerrilla Family, even disloyal Aryan Brotherhood members. No one was safe from the reach of a gang that made betrayal punishable by death. How did Bingham, locked away in a maximum security cell, command such violence? The answer lay in the Brotherhood's system of communication. Orders flowed out through coded messages, often disguised in legal paperwork or hidden within letters. Trusted soldiers acted as couriers, ensuring instructions reached the right hands. Even attorneys, sometimes unwittingly, carried messages back and forth under the shield of legal privilege. This underground network allowed Bingham and Mills to orchestrate murders hundreds of miles away. To investigators, it seemed almost impossible. How could two men in solitary cells wield such power? But the answer was simple: loyalty, fear, and the Brotherhood's unwavering structure. Inside the Brotherhood, there was no room for hesitation. A green light from leadership meant death. Soldiers carried out killings with homemade knives, sometimes in broad daylight, knowing that failure could mean their own execution. Every act of violence reinforced the gang's authority. Guards and inmates alike understood the message. Bingham and Mills might be locked in cells, but their reach was limitless. By the late 1990s, the federal prison system had become a battlefield. Stabbings, beatings, and murders marked the Brotherhood's campaigns of dominance. Each act of violence tightened their control and spread their reputation. For investigators and prosecutors, the scope of the bloodshed was staggering. The Aryan Brotherhood was estimated to make up less than 1% of the prison population. Yet it was responsible for up to 1 in 5 murders inside federal facilities. Behind those numbers were men like Tyler Bingham, issuing orders from the shadows. For Bingham, violence wasn't chaos, it was order. Each murder, each attack, was a tool to maintain control. But what he didn't know was that law enforcement was watching, documenting, and slowly building a case. The 1997 killings of Frank Joyner and Abdul Salam would not be forgotten. They would become a cornerstone of the government's case against Bingham, proof that the Aryan Brotherhood's leaders weren't just prisoners. They were murderers orchestrating death from inside their cells. The blood Bingham spilled was about to come back to haunt him. By the early 2000s, federal authorities were done watching from the sidelines. For decades, the Aryan Brotherhood had operated as a shadow empire within America's prisons, dealing drugs, ordering murders, and ruling with terror. Now, the government was ready to strike. In 2002, prosecutors unveiled one of the largest federal indictments in U.S. history against a prison gang. 40 members and associates of the Aryan Brotherhood were charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and murder. At the heart of the case were two men: Barry, the Baron Mills, and Tyler, the Hulk Bingham. The indictment accused the Aryan Brotherhood of being a criminal enterprise responsible for at least 32 murders and attempted murders over a span of 25 years. For federal prosecutors, the goal was clear: cripple the gang's leadership once and for all. Among the murders highlighted were the 1997 killings of Frank Joyner and Abdul Salam in Pennsylvania, murders that prosecutors said were ordered directly by Bingham and Mills. These killings were portrayed not as random acts of prison violence, but as deliberate, racially motivated assassinations meant to solidify the Brotherhood's power. Building the case wasn't easy. The Aryan Brotherhood operated in shadows with members bound by secrecy and fear. But prosecutors had a powerful weapon: defectors. Former members of the gang, facing long prison terms themselves, agreed to testify against their brothers. These insiders revealed the inner workings of the Brotherhood, the codes, the orders, the murders carried out on leadership's command. Their testimonies pierced the veil of silence that had long protected men like Bingham. In 2006, after years of preparation, the trial began in California. It was one of the most expensive and complex federal prosecutions of its time. The government sought the ultimate penalty: death. For months, jurors listened to chilling testimony. Witnesses described stabbings in the yard, coded orders from solitary cells, and the Brotherhood's strict code of blood in, blood out. Prosecutors argued that Bingham and Mills were not just inmates. They were crime bosses orchestrating murder from behind prison walls. The defense countered by painting the government's witnesses as unreliable, former gang members with incentives to lie in exchange for lighter sentences. But the weight of evidence was heavy. The testimony of multiple defectors, combined with intercepted communications and decades of violent history, formed a case that was hard to ignore. After a 5-month trial, the verdict was delivered. Both Barry Mills and Tyler Bingham were found guilty of murder and racketeering. For the families of the victims, it was justice long overdue. For the Brotherhood, it was a devastating blow. 2 of their highest leaders condemned by the system they had defied for decades. But the question remained: what punishment would they face? Federal prosecutors sought the death penalty. For the families of Frank Joyner and Abdul Salam, execution seemed the only fitting outcome. But the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. Deadlocked, they spared Bingham's life. Instead, Tyler the Hulk Bingham was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, not in a general population yard where influence flowed freely, but in the isolation of the most secure prison in America. The government had won. The trial had cost millions, taken years of investigation, and demanded the testimony of men who risked their lives to speak. But in the end, Tyler Bingham was buried alive in the walls of Supermax. The empire he helped build was wounded, but not destroyed. The Aryan Brotherhood still breathed inside America's prisons. Yet for Bingham himself, the fight was over. His kingdom had been reduced to a solitary cell. This is ADX Florence, the United States' most secure federal prison. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, it houses terrorists, cartel leaders, and the most dangerous gangsters in the country. For Tyler the Hulk Bingham, this fortress became his final home. After his 2006 conviction, Bingham was transferred here, condemned to spend the rest of his days in near total isolation. 3 life sentences ensured he would never again walk free. Life at ADX is defined by silence and steel. Inmates spend 23 hours a day alone in cells barely larger than a parking space. Meals are slid through a slot in the door. Human contact is almost non-existent. For a man who once commanded armies of soldiers behind bars, Bingham now commands nothing more than the walls of his cell. His empire of violence reduced to memories, his influence muted by layers of concrete and security. But even here, the shadow of the Aryan Brotherhood lingers. Bingham's co-leader, Barry Mills, lived and died in these same walls. Mills passed away in 2018 at the age of 70, his body failing long before the Brotherhood's name lost its power. With Mills gone, Bingham remained one of the last living architects of the gang's federal leadership era. His survival is not just a testament to endurance, but to the strange reality of prison gangs. Even in cages, their names continue to inspire fear. For the Aryan Brotherhood, the imprisonment of its leaders did not mean extinction. Younger members stepped in to continue operations. Orders still traveled in whispers, messages still passed in codes, and the cycle of violence still repeated itself in prison yards across the nation. The Brotherhood endures because it was never built on one man, or even two. It was built on a culture of violence, a structure of loyalty, and the promise of power in a place where most men have none. And yet the incarceration of men like Bingham does matter. Federal officials point to the 2002 indictments and 2006 convictions as a turning point, a moment when the government proved it could take down even the most powerful gang leaders. The Brotherhood may have survived, but its command structure was fractured. Its influence, though deadly, was diminished. Inside ADX Florence, Tyler the Hulk Bingham lives out his days. There are no soldiers to carry his orders, no crowds to intimidate, only silence, isolation, and the endless ticking of time. But the question remains, does removing men like Bingham truly end their reign? Or does the Brotherhood's design, a hydra with many heads, ensure that someone else will always rise to take their place? For criminologists and law enforcement alike, the story of the Aryan Brotherhood is not just about individuals. It's about the system that allows gangs to thrive, even in the most controlled environments in the world. Tyler Bingham's life is a study in extremes, from petty thief to high commissioner of America's most feared prison gang, from commanding murders to rotting in a cell where he can barely move. His story reveals both the terrifying power of gangs and the crushing weight of justice when it finally comes. Tyler, the Hulk. Bingham will never again breathe free air. His legacy is carved not in stone, but in scars. Scars left on victims, scars left on prisons, scars left on a system forever haunted by the reach of the Aryan Brotherhood. The door has closed on his life as a leader, but the shadow he helped cast still lingers. Long after the cell lights go dark,